the wrong metrics kill brand. If all you have is very short-term funnel metrics, it's very hard to invest in long-term things, and creating a brand is by definition one of those. Like, hey, track some brand metrics. I don't care. There's a whole bunch of them, right? Like anyone that's on B2C knows these, and B2B, it's like they're a little bit new, but I don't care if it's some high-level awareness metric, if it's some type of sentiment metric, whatever it is. And by the way, it's a lot easier to track these things too. Like we're no longer, a lot of B2B companies, I think were like, oh my God, it's going to cost us $500,000 to run a brand recall survey. And they're thinking of one like you'd literally have people at airports asking questions, and there's tons of tools that can help get you that for so much less money now. I absolutely think it's important to track the metrics, but I think just track a couple brand metrics and have that as a goal for your entire marketing team. And when you have that, and then you can show the improvements to the board, like I think they're much more likely to buy in. A lot of boards, a lot of CEOs, a lot of founders have been burnt by bad marketing teams in the past where they gave them a lot of money. They weren't tracking metrics. They didn't really see it. Like the numbers didn't go up and to the right. And they're like, oh, we wasted it. And that really hurts. That hurts future marketing teams as well.
Welcome to Best Story Wins. I'm your host, Jason LANKOW, and I'm joined by my co-host, Josh RITCHIE. And today our guest is Bill Macaitis of SaaS CMO Pro. Hey, Bill, how's it going?
Hey, doing great, man.
Cool. To start us off, can you give us a quick overview of your career journey and what you've been focused on these days?
I kind of did about half my career in B2C, half in B2B. You know, I did a startup right out of college in the Midwest. We had no idea what we were doing. It was in the gaming space. But it did force me to learn a lot about marketing because we also had no idea that things like VCs existed and that would give you money. And so we had to use all of our own money coming out of college. And trust me, I was eating ramen noodles in college and had not much money. So we were put right into the flames, but it did force me to think about growth and marketing a lot differently. How we built our brand, how we did, virality loops, SEO, word of mouth, like all these type of things that I was just forced to learn because we didn't have big budgets. And from there, we sold that startup. I went to work for another large media company. So I worked for companies like IGN Entertainment. They had websites like Rotten Tomatoes that you might know, or AskMen or IGN. We grew that up to about 100 million uniques, and then went over and News Corp bought us out. And so then I had a chance to work for all the News Corp properties, which was super fun. So it was everything from Fox Sports to American Idol to all their different movie and TV properties, and building these brands. And it was a blast, and we got it to the third largest network in the world. um, and then I got a call from Salesforce, and this guy Mark, and he was looking to build this kind of whole new SaaS revolution. And I had a wonderful opportunity to join them pretty early on, and went to, switched it over to the B2B side. And so I spent time at Salesforce as their SVP of marketing, spent about 4 years there, then went on to Zendesk as their CMO, went through an IPO, and then Slack as their CMO CRO with another eventual IPO and acquisition. And then today I was like, what do I do? I felt like I had a nice journey on the operator side, and I really wanted to help out other operators that were going through this. So I just said, hey, I want to help advise these companies. So right now, I currently serve as an advisor or sometimes board member for a lot of these SaaS and AI companies that are looking to improve their growth or are going through hyper growth and just are trying to manage the whole go to market model, how they grow, how they build their brands, how they build PLG motions or sell into the enterprises. I just kind of geek out on all that stuff. And my wife and daughter get really bored when I talk about it. So I need other people that are equally excited, which is another reason why I was excited to talk with you guys about this stuff today.
That's awesome. You mentioned this guy Mark called you over to Salesforce. I presume we know which Mark you're talking about, but what was what was your initial impression? Like, what stage of growth were they at?
Yeah, actually, they were a little further down the road, right? Um, but I will say this, like, it was different, right? Coming from B2C, for those that have kind of worked on that side of the house, and then going to B2B, it's just a very different environment. And I will say one of the reasons, like, I was really excited to join Salesforce was they were looking at go to market in a totally new lens, right? Like before Salesforce and kind of the cloud existed, the way you would sell software was you would literally have to find the CIO and CTO. You would sell top down, you would buy them steak dinners, and they would buy software on behalf of these teams, right? On behalf of the marketing team or the support team. They would install it on their own servers. It was super expensive. You couldn't even sell this stuff to like SMBs, right? And Salesforce kind of, when they came around, their whole model being in the cloud allowed anyone just to, a website, you just log in and you can start using it. So all of a sudden allowed people to start selling directly to Salesforce could sell to, directly to salespeople or directly to marketers or directly to people running customer support, right? And we could innovate with things like having a free trial and just starting to use it. And it was priced in a way that SMBs could start using it, right? And they didn't need to have a giant technical team to install it because it was just a website. You would just log in, right? So I always thought that was super cool. And Mark was just amazing. He's just this like huge presence. One, he's just physically very tall. He's just like, this big guy, but he has like a heart of gold. He's done so much philanthropy, just a really advanced modern thinker. And, I just relish my time there and getting a chance to learn from that team and Mark in particular.
That's really cool. So I'm just kind of putting it together right now as you're chatting that you were there at Salesforce and then you went over after Zendesk to Slack, who was then acquired by Salesforce. What was that like for you to kind of come full circle in a way?
Yeah, see the family come back together. That was super cool. When I was at Salesforce, Mark was always ahead of his time, right? And I remember really early on, maybe 10 years before um, kind of the social revolution came, Mark was all in on that. He was all about the social enterprise and positioning it. And we even had an internal product that was called Chatter. It was a little bit like Slack, kind of different. It was, based more on a follower model, not really a channel model. And it had some degrees of success, but I think Mark always wanted like that connective tissue of a product like Slack because it really did bring all these different products together and kind of that central nervous system. And so that was really cool. That was actually after I'd gone when it, kind of looped back and part of the team, but I knew people on both sides. And, it was really fun to see the kind of family reunited like that.
That's cool. So you kind of provide an overview there of your backstory, which was really cool to hear. Would you say there was a through line in your career journey, and if so, what would you say it is? And then, secondly, as a follow up to that, I'm curious why you think you ended up in brand marketing and in senior leadership roles.
Yeah. I'd say, the common DNA that I always tried to take was one, just try to be intellectually curious, right? Like I think go to market, brand, marketing is always evolving and it's always innovating, right? And I think like I always wanted to work for companies that were willing to embrace a more modern model, right? And I think Salesforce had that. A lot of the B2C companies and the techniques we were using had that. And even having a chance to go to Zendesk and Slack, I joined really early there. So like Zendesk was maybe about 60, 65 people, I think. Slack, I joined really as the first marketer, employee number 50, and as the CMO. And in both those cases, it really appealed to me because like I was able to build out a marketing playbook totally from scratch, right? There wasn't an existing one there. And I think in marketing, in brand, in demand gen, whatever the thing is, like there's just some older playbooks that I think sometimes people default to, right? And especially I've noticed in B2B when I came over, there's like a really dusty old playbook, right? It's like, hey, sell top down, cold call people in, run events, buy them steak dinners and only sell to the enterprise. And I just thought like, there's so many more modern ways to go about it with virality loops, with AI tools, content, SEO, inbound nurturing, ABM targeting. Like there's all these more just advanced ways to build these businesses. So for me, like that was always a big thing, like working with founders and even boards that were open-minded to more modern ways to do go to market. And in a cool way, like I think it's coming much more in the forefront now, especially for a lot of these SaaS companies, right? They need to be capital efficient. And so there's a lot of ways to grow. And I've never been a big fan of just throwing tons of dollars at growth levers that just aren't that efficient. And so I think there's like a big focus now on like, how do you grow and scale, but how do you do it capital efficiently? And all those companies were really open-minded. The boards that I worked with, the founders, and it was something that I think we had a lot of success because of that, because we had a really modern go-to-market engine to pair with a great product.
Yeah, I mean that makes a ton of sense. And what prompted you after this string of big wins at awesome companies to go off and start your own thing?
It was like, I was way too young to retire. I'm terrible at golf. I have no idea what I would do. It was like I had a couple of like opportunities to become a VC. But I just thought like, I don't know, it felt like there were a lot of VCs already out there. I didn't know if like I'd really be any better or be able to help out more. But I did know like my personal was I was going through these different stages. Like I always wish like we had more of a more of an advisory team, an advisory board that I could lean on and ask questions from people that had actually been operators. Sometimes our boards were great, but sometimes they were just boards that like board members that had just they had a financial background and that was their whole life, right? Was just investing. And so sometimes you just want to talk to people that have done it. And I just felt like there was a lack of people at that time that were helping out in that capacity. The other really kind of neat thing is like there are cool SaaS and AI companies all over the world. Like once I started just focusing in on being an advisor, I had people reaching out to me from Japan and South Africa and Brazil, from Germany, from Greece, and I've worked with companies all over the world, right? And they're so cool, and like they're just like these genuine, humble founders that maybe aren't in Silicon Valley and super plugged in, but just want to learn and get better, right? And I found too, like a lot of times, the predominant model for these founders starting their SaaS or AI companies, a lot of times they're just like a technical founder or a product founder and kind of the whole go to market is very new to them, right? Like the marketing, the sales, the success. And there's so many different variations of how you go about, right? There's like SLG or sales led growth, there's PLG product led growth, there's marketing led growth, there's all these different ways to do it. And so for me, that was like just super rewarding and humbling and gratifying to work with really cool founders and help them out. And I just kind of always remembered myself when I was a founder or just when I was like running these teams, just how difficult it was. And just having someone to talk to was really helpful for me. So I was just trying to like pay it back a little bit there and, also just have the chance to work with these cool companies.
As you're helping, different B2B SaaS CMOs, you've said that B2B doesn't have to be boring. How do you help them think about, actually making a B2B brand truly stand out?
So one thing I've noticed with B2B, and I was really shocked when I came in, was beyond sometimes using a little bit of a data playbook, there is almost like a resistance to developing a brand, right? And I think there's just an unknown about it. If you look at most B2B companies, the metrics they track are very much funnel metrics. And by funnel metrics, I mean like, hey, how many people are coming in? How many leads do we get? How many of those turn opportunities? What's the, pipeline, the closed business? And it was really interesting because when I came from B2C, like we would track a lot of those like, type funnel type metrics for the B2C side, but we'd also track all these brand metrics. We would track, aided recall and unaided recall and sentiment and share voice and share conversation and all these different things. And when it came to B2B side, like no one was doing it. And what I saw from that, there was a follow up from where if you aren't tracking the metric, no one kind of cared about it, right? And all the money and energy and time was going into quote unquote demand gen or lead generation, right? And so, you started to see like a lot of these companies that just didn't know about brand, had invested in brand, couldn't track it, and and as such, they ignored it, right? And I would see this too for B2B SaaS. The thing with like SaaS and AI companies, it's really interesting. Is like there's such a good venture capital ecosystem out there that no matter where someone has success, there's going to be 5 or 10 competitors, right? If you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I've got my own unique company and no one else does this, like even if you have a modicum of success, the VCs will fund a bunch of other competitors, right? And so what you start to see too is like you start to look at these companies and they all look the same, right? They all sounded the same. You go into the product and they all were like white background, black text. They all sounded sterile, monotonous, just just very like businessy, like in a not good sense, right? Um, and I just always thought, coming from a consumer background, I was like, whoa, like, hey guys, we gotta look different than everyone else. We gotta sound a little bit different. We have to have a unique personality, right? And that's not just on our website, that's in the product too. Another thing that happens in B2B and in B2B marketing is a lot of times that team is just tasked, the marketing team is just tasked with top of funnel, right? So they'll only focus on outbound marketing campaigns and then the website. But the minute it goes into the product, it's like, well, that's a different team. We don't control that, or they have their own developers. Like we don't get there. But, from a user perspective, they don't kind of see the difference, right? And so, I just saw like this lack of differentiation. And I just thought that like, hey, on the B2B side, it is such an effective way to differentiate. And by the way, a really cheaper way, right? I'm not talking like, I think a lot of people I worked with a lot of CEOs. It's like sometimes people hear like, oh, brand. Oh my God, that means we need like a $40 million budget, right? And like we don't have that, or I worked with a company and they just wasted the money. And it's like sometimes a brand is just creating a unique visual identity. It's creating a unique editorial tone and voice. It's making your product like infusing all that into the product, not just the website, right? And so I think across like Zendesk, Slack, Salesforce, like I always just tried to, carry that banner and be the person that was really advocating that, hey, we have to, think about the entire journey, whether they're talking about our ad campaigns, our content, the website, in the product, the onboarding, the support, like all those are little brand touch points that we can, delight people and differentiate and look different than everyone else.
Yeah, that's awesome perspective. And when you think about that scenario where you have 10, or 100 competitors, and totally hear what you're saying, you go and you see a lot of people describing themselves similarly, especially in the realm of like value proposition, right? Where oftentimes it's some version of like save time, save money, make more money, and I'm curious how you've thought about, both in your, roles at other companies, but also in helping other companies around the world. How do you balance this like tension between saying something very clearly in a way that people will obviously understand it, and, it'll like map to something they already know, versus being distinct and saying something in a, maybe different way or clever way that is not, contrived and confusing. How do you balance those things?
Yeah, messaging is a really tough exercise, right? And I think a lot of startups, that's front and center for them. Is that's one of the first things they have to think about is like, hey, what is our messaging? Go out and how are people going to be receptive to it? I can say a couple things I don't like. The first thing I don't like is when someone just explains themselves in such, multitudes and 20-year far reaching, like we're the next gen AI platform disrupting XYZ space. And you look at it and you're like, I have no idea what you do, right? Like, I feel like maybe the founder knows and maybe the investors know, but the average users are like, I don't get it. Like, what do you do, right? So I think there's a fine line of I lean a little bit towards like, hey, make sure you can explain it that someone actually gets it, right? That's you're not writing this for yourself, you're writing this for your users, right? When you explain what you are and your headline or your subheadline. I also think like emotion is important, right? To your point. It's important to have something that people can get behind and feel like they're part of something larger. I think a big part of Salesforce success, and Mark was really good about this, was you know, creating a mission that people were excited to be behind, right? Like Salesforce in the early days, we had like the Ghostbuster no software logo. And if you think about it at the time, like all they were selling was sales automation software, right? This is like so you can track your leads and pipeline and how different sales agents are doing. That wasn't really like the product wasn't no software, but he wanted to be part of like a larger mission, right? Of like, hey, we're moving away from this on-prem world to the SaaS world. And even today, Mark, if you go to his keynotes, he always talks about like some larger world issue that's happening, and he tries to tie that into what Salesforce is about and their mission and their vision. And people really want to be part of these missions, right? When you're emotionally invested, you want to be part of something. So I think it is a fine line, right? You're trying to balance that succinctness, that hey, you understand what they do, that it has some emotion behind it, but for me, like a litmus test was always like, hey, find someone walking down the street or anyone, just explain what you do. Give them the elevator pitch, right? And if they understand it and they nod their head and they're like, oh yeah, like I like that, right? That's you've hit it. If they have like if you ask them to repeat it or and they have no idea, they they're just totally confused. Like I think you need to iterate on that a little bit.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Slack. You know, I think recently the brand has gone through another evolution, and it's a bit more sophisticated. And I think that makes sense. It's under the umbrella of Salesforce. But pre-acquisition, there was this like sense of whimsy that kind of dripped out of the brand. And I think you all did a great job of, positioning as a B2B SaaS company, but it felt like a consumer brand as well. And I always thought it was a really great execution. I'm curious, as you all built that beloved brand, what were some of the key decisions that went into what was ultimately a huge success?
I think a lot of it kind of get back to our core values as a company. Pretty early on, we took pretty much everyone at the company and we did this offsite and we said like, hey, what should be our core values, right? Like, what is Slack really about? And we came up with about 5 or 6 values, and a couple ones that really resonated for me was empathy, right? Like, can you put yourselves in your customer's shoes? We had things like craftsmanship. We had things like, never using acronyms, just being authentic. Um, and I think a lot of that for me, I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but for me, a brand isn't your logo or your slogan. It's a sum of all these little experiences that you have with a company. And that could be, the first time you go to the website. That could be if you're talking to a salesperson. That could be reading the legal terms of service. That could be, the onboarding. That could be the marketing, the content, the customer support, like all these little micro experiences. And I think like we spent a lot of time trying to optimize around that and to give people a good experience, right? We hired people that had a lot of empathy. When we would do interviews, we would notice things like, did they open the door for you, or did they offer anything, or were they just, were they receptive, like asking you how you were doing? We wanted people that could walk in our customers' shoes and have that empathy. And by the way, that's very different. I've been part of a lot of different organizations. A lot of times, like the hiring profile is you're trying to hire these sharks, these super type A's that are like dominants and will do whatever to get ahead. And like we had just a lot of like nice people. We were like caring people that were like trying to like give good experiences. Um, and I think those experiences like bubble up as part of the brand, right? We had a message of the day for people that use Slack earlier on, like Slack took a little while to load, right? And it was like, what do we do? Do we do the Microsoft hourglass there, or do we actually put in a little message of the day, right? And it was kind of like fun or inspirational. That was like a little fun brand touch point. We had when when an app would be upgraded, then you'd have the release notes. We actually would custom write those, and the marketing team would get in there and make them fun and witty. We really like codified our tone of voice and really went through and we tried to train everyone on it, whether that was our support team, our sales team, our marketing team. So it was consistent, but it was fun, it was relatable, it was whimsy. We never tried to use acronyms, we never tried to talk down to people. um Having unique visual identity, again, like choosing some really like some strong colors, and infusing those into the product. Um, our marketing campaigns, everything we tried to do, I probably because like, I had such a huge consumer background, I was trying to bring a lot of that into it. And I just never bought the argument that, if you're a B2B organization, you have to only use acronyms and talk down to people and be super stiff and boring. I was just like, "Hey, I've seen this work in consumer. I'm pretty sure this is gonna work in the B2B side." And that's probably why you saw like it felt a little very consumery for a lot of the marketing and just overall experiences that we were trying to bring to people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's funny when you mentioned those Slack loading messages. It might be a fuzzy memory or a false memory, but I think I remember that you had the reticulating splines loading message. Is that right? Like a Sims throwback?
I think yeah, we had a lot of like those Easter eggs that were in there. I was always a big fan of Easter eggs too. I remember I tried pushing for them in Salesforce when I was there, and I was like, "Hey, when someone goes to the website, if they mouse over this one part, we should have a little Easter egg, right?" And I don't think I could push that one through at that time, but yeah, Slack, there were a lot of Easter eggs. I mean, Slack was a gaming company. Slack was glitched to start, right? So talk about like, I think that's why it was a really good fit for me. Like, it was a lot of people that had gaming backgrounds, B2C backgrounds, that were kind of pivoting into this B2B product. And so a lot of people, that's all we knew was like, how do we create these fun, delightful experiences for these people? Um, Yeah, but it's super fun, and it's why, like, I'll often get asked that question, like, "Hey, what was really unique about Slack, or why did it grow so fast?" And I just finished recording, like, a 50-minute video, so if you like hearing a little bit more detail on that, I did that for SaaS CMO Pro. I'll be releasing it on my YouTube channel. But it's kind of fun to go back because I think like it is very different. Like it took a very different playbook than I think a lot of traditional B2B companies have. And a lot of that was just the DNA of the company was very different, right? It was a lot of B2C DNA of people and people that love brand that were kind of like building it from the early days.
Yeah, I'd love to check that out. And I'm wondering how you balance the overall need for, whatever the spirit of the brand is, you want some measure of consistency, right? How do you balance the need for consistency across touch points with the, concurrent need to experiment and innovate in marketing efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And I think you have to be careful and not be too dogmatic about the consistency because I don't know. I've seen large companies kind of get so rigid there that everything looks again and sounds the same and everything is risk evasive and it's about just I don't want to lose my job and so we'll play it safe. And again, I feel like that's how everybody sounds the same and looks the same. And when you have a dozen competitors, and by the way, I'm in some spaces now like God, I'm helping this customer support autonomous agents AI company, and I love them. There are literally 100 competitors. I'm not even like making that up or it's just trying to ingratiate that. Like there are 100 competitors, right? And so how do you really stand out? How do you be a little bit different? So I feel like a don't be too rigid. B don't penalize people for taking risks within your company. Really encourage that. That could be from, maybe you do have an innovation or testing budget, that's one way to do it. It's like, "Hey, we're always gonna try something new and try to get out there a little bit more with the creative, and it's okay if you fail, right? Or it's okay if it doesn't work, right?" And I'm kinda like this weird one where, like, I love brand and I love building these unique creative experiences, but I also my dad was an engineer, and so I've got, like, this data side of me, and so, like, I like testing things, like, at Slack, with a lot of our creative campaigns, we extensively used control groups and split tests to test different copy variations, to test different creatives, to test different channels, online versus offline. And we would do this in a lot of like local markets, like Austin, Denver, and Seattle. And then we have sister cities that didn't get it. And we could always try to measure this stuff too. And some stuff, the stuff was like a little different or a little daring would work better, right? And again, that's just not even marketing assets, but that's within the product itself. We did a ton of testing on the onboarding flow and different messaging and how people reacted to it. So, like in a weird way, I remember like I had this conversation with some of the Salesforce designers, and I was at the time like I was actually getting annoyed because the higher ups at Salesforce. A lot of times we would just say like, "Hey, you should do this, designer. Just do it this way, right?" And I was always like, "Well, we can actually test this. We're talking about like what's on the homepage. Like, why should the ivory tower decide how our users or prospects are going to react to it? Why don't we just like measure how the prospects react to it, right?" And so I wanted to empower these designers to be like, "Hey, like do something different. Like I know they said do that, but let's maybe we try that one, but also let's try this other one and we can test it and we can see which one the users react best to, right?" Um, and so like I think that's important to have that autonomy to do it.
Yeah, and what do you think is the biggest obstacle to actually, because everyone says, "I love testing, and learn," but then it's like when it comes to actually getting like a tracking pixel added to the site,
Oh, I
it's
know.
just
Yeah.
like things get, stretched out for months, or there is that like, no, we just know what we want to say. We got to trust our
Yeah,
gut.
totally.
So how do you break through those barriers or obstacles to actually getting that like, yeah, let's test it?
I think there's a couple things. Like one, you can't really do that much testing. I think for the majority of companies out there, they literally don't have enough volume to be running 100 tests, right? I was very fortunate with Slack and Zendesk and Salesforce that these were kind of high volume B2B services. But even there, it's like when you kind of get into data science, man, you have to have a certain enough of, statistical significance and a certain amount of like N and people that are being experienced to it that you can't be running 100. Like, so you really have to think, like, be really careful. Like, hey, what are the ones that we really want to test? Do we have enough volume there? Um, and then I think from the technical side, which was a great point you had brought up, you do have to think about like, are there other cheaper ways to to test this stuff, right? So a lot of times, like I get into like multi-touch attribution modeling and linear regression and pixels and this and that. And those are great. They're expensive. There's a lot of technical complexities behind it. But sometimes an easy way is like what I mentioned earlier, is just using control groups, right? So if you're a European startup and you're in 5 markets, right? You're in the UK, Germany, France, the Nordics, I don't know, Italy. Well, and you're deciding like, hey, we want to run some new marketing campaign. Just run it in one of those countries, right? And see like what the lift was. That doesn't require any special tracking pixel. That doesn't require, a lot of like multi-touch attribution modeling. You're just targeting, right? You're just using it either online or offline, right? So I think there's different ways to go about it, and you just have to be really careful with how many you do at a time, and kind of the different approaches you use on the testing standpoint.
Yeah, that's good. So in your content, you've been vocal about the importance of customer marketing and how it's often underutilized. Curious to hear why you think that's the case and how you think companies can do that work better.
So for me, what I've seen in the SaaS space, SaaS software space, is that if you really look at the numbers, if you look at like the financials and how much money we're making, usually half your money comes from add-on upgrade expansion, right? An existing customer that comes in that gets bigger, they buy more products, they have more seats, more usage, whatever it is, right? And I always thought it was kind of weird that, well, why is the marketing team only focused on top of funnel, just bringing in net new people, right? I'm like, marketers, like, we're good at one to many stuff. Like, a lot of sales is one to one. Marketers were one to many. So we can automate things, we can build campaigns that hit a lot of different people. Like, why are we just doing net new? Like, why wouldn't we focus on expansion, um and I found a lot of this was just again kind of that historical how B2B was done, right? It was, well, marketing just gets net new and sales sells them, and then success, sells them more stuff once they're an existing customer. And so I just thought like, hey, this is a huge opportunity, right? Like most marketing teams, let's not have 95% of our people in net new and one person on customer marketing, right? Like that should be a half and half type thing. And then secondarily, like what I found in B2B is these are journeys. These are, people don't see one ad and buy you. And same thing, they don't see one interaction and, if they're an existing customer and double their usage or double the amount they're spending with you, right? They're journeys. These are 10, 20, 30, 40 interactions over many months. And I found like marketing can and should get involved in that because we're good at like creating content. We're good at educating people. We're good at showcasing like cool things that our customers are doing. And I just think like customer marketing is an area where marketing A should be doing, and B, like we have the tools to do it, right? Um, Obviously customer marketing is kind of one of those terms that it means a lot of things to a lot of people, right? To me, that's more just beyond like getting testimonials. To me, customer marketing is marketing to your installed base and educating them on what's possible and getting them to think about how they expand and spend more with you. Um, and I found like at Zendesk, I was a big content marketer, right? So we had like a pretty big team that would create tons of content. Well, the content we were creating for prospects, I found the customers also really liked. I remember we had this really popular piece of content. It was the top 10 interview questions for hiring customer support agents. Um, it was a funny one. It took us like an hour to write, and we just went over to our VP of customer support and said, "Hey, what questions do you use? What are your best questions?" Right? And we wrote it up in an article, and it was one of our most popular pieces of content, not just for new prospects, but a lot of existing customers wanted to see that too, right? And that was a cool thing where they were getting educated and nurtured on best practices, and they started to trust send us more and started to maybe use us and experiment with some of our different products that were coming up more. Or even things like we did a lot of in-product education. So again, a lot of times like marketing never touches the product. And I was big on like, well, we need to talk with our users. We need like a module within the product that we can show them this content, that we can show them like and educate them around best practices and cool things that our customers are doing. And, when we release something, we can let them know. I remember another story was like I would do a lot of these, conferences for Zendesk. We'd go out, we talk to users, and we'd always have a session where we'd ask people if they would, what features do you want to see? And someone would inevitably always raise their hand and ask for a feature that already existed, right? And I was like, oh, like what are we doing? We got to get better at this, right? So we can't just like, oh, we release something and put it on our blog. Like we need to tell them within the product, right? Because that's where they're spending all their time. So, anyways, I just think like, yeah, customer marketing is a lot of times in B2B, it's a little bit ignored. Sometimes it's viewed not part of the remit. I think it absolutely should, because really, in light of that, letting you're really defaulting just one-to-one salespeople trying to do all this, and that's just not very efficient way to do it.
So, what can you elaborate on some of the effective strategies you've used for engaging customers throughout that life cycle? I know you mentioned identifying, kind of pre-sale content marketing assets that would also be interesting to current customers. Do you have a favorite framework or approach you take to, I always think of like Steve Blank's, you know, funnel diagrams and so forth. But how do you think about that strategy for engaging customers post close?
What I would say is like it's similar work to doing prospects, right? Like identify that ICP, identify their persona, what are their pain points, what do they need to be educated on, and how do you view this as a journey, right? And the journey just doesn't end when they become a lead, right? So marketing should be spending time from lead to close business. A lot of times that's just handed off to sales and you do the rest, right? Marketing can still help there. And then the journey continues, from customer on, right? So I always viewed it like as a journey. How do we map that out? How do we like what are the different sequences, the content that we're going to use? Also, what are the channels, right? A lot of times I think customer marketing defaults to email because like, oh, we have an email and it's free and everything's consent. Well, not everybody opens and looks at that email. Like 90% of it gets stuck in the spam box or junk. So like that's where I push on like again in product education, building a module within the product. We actually did a lot of our ads, we did retargeting towards existing customers, right? So we would do a lot of these campaigns, not just to net new, but towards existing customers. Because like, hey, we do have new products and we do have new best practices, and we want to showcase how existing customers were leveraging like a Zendesk or a Slack or whoever it might be. So for me, it's almost like, hey, you're running a marketing campaign. It's just to an existing customer. And how do you leverage the different channels, the sequences? How do you build the drips, the nurturing? And build that content so that you can educate in a good way. And and I think you have to be really careful too, and not just being like super salesy. Like I remember when I was bringing up in product education at Zendesk, and there were a lot of fears from the product folks, like, oh well, we just don't want to see like giant ads, saying buy this, buy this, buy this in the product. Like that's going to be super annoying. And I agreed with them, right? Like I come from the customer centric camp, which is like kind of what I was talking about with Slack, right? You want to delight people and give them good experiences. So, all the content we tried to create was really more helpful content that explained like where the industry was going or best practices and how to use Zendesk or cool things that customers were doing. We really tried to avoid the, hey, this is on sale, buy it today, buy it today, buy it today, right? And so that's how I tried to approach it.
Shifting gears a bit, so you've built and led marketing teams at a lot of the best SaaS companies in the world. What do you look for when you're building out a high performing marketing team?
I think the question's even a little loaded, like the high performing. Like again, it kind of goes down that path of like we got to get high performing athletes and the best of the best. I found a lot of times like the culture really matters, right? Like finding people, whatever the culture for your company is, right? Like again, for Slack for us, it was around empathy and understanding our customer. Like that was really important. And we tried to hire people that really lived that and felt that. And they looked a lot different than sometimes normal people, right? Or we wanted people that maybe had a B2C background and this is their first foray into B2B. That's okay, right? Like they're going to bring a really unique perspective on it. Um, Other things I've looked at is just, are they just curious? What do they know about their space? Tell me, like, what are the 5 sites, blogs, podcasts, whatever that you go to every day to just learn about your space? Because I feel in marketing in particular, it's always evolving and there's always new strategies and tactics that you're using and right. And so I liked people that were intellectually curious. I like team first people. Like a lot of the metrics I use for my teams were team based metrics, right? Because I think a lot of times marketing gets very siloed within these individual teams. And I wanted how do all these teams work towards collective goals that we're doing in marketing, right? And sometimes what we're doing in marketing should be a shared goal for the entire company, right? Like I remember at Slack, I was a big advocate for tracking Net Promoter Score, and that was a company goal. That wasn't just a marketing goal or a support goal, because everyone, again, like everyone impacts the experience people have with your company. Um, so yeah, for me, like those are the lenses that I would look at. Do they align with your values? Are they intellectually curious? Are they team first? Like I found like that created a really strong environment for people to succeed.
How do you foster that culture of creativity and being team first with your teams and at the companies where you take on roles?
For me, a couple things I found like help with that. Like one, we would have a regular marketing all hands like every 2 weeks, and within that we would always have like little awards. We had little trophies, right? Where people would get like, hey, the customer centric award, right? Or the best teammate, or the most innovative, tried something, took a little risk, right? um I think internally rewarding that, I think um rewarding that financially too, right? Like, hey, let's promote people that live those values. Let's give them more money, right? We want to reward our best people there. Um, I think trying to carve out from a budget perspective, right? Like having like testing budgets or people where can take risks and be creative. Um, and again, like even having like a team-based goal, like a lot of times, like I'll see like there'll just be a separate brand team. And I've never really been a fan of that because I'm like, why would just one small team be responsible for brand? It should be the entire marketing effort, right? So let's track these brand metrics, right? Let's track our funnel metrics, let's track our experience metrics, but the entire marketing team has to think about how they can optimize and improve those, right? I think like metrics are a really big driver. Metrics kill brand. Metrics kill creatives because if you choose the wrong metrics, you're screwed, right? Like if you're not tracking brand metrics, it's really hard to advocate for long-term brand, creation. And if all you have is leads as your metric and that's for a lot of B2B organizations, that's it. It's really hard to invest in more long-term things that develop brand that help you in the long run, right? Um, and that's doubly hard because I think a lot of brand or creative people just aren't quants. They're not like thinking like, oh, we should be tracking all this stuff. But if you can start tracking it, then it's like, "Oh, wow, okay, we can see the impact we're making," right? Like we're lifting our awareness in this market, we're improving our sentiment, right? And then the board also gets trust in you, right? Boards are a big part of this. A lot of people like don't see that, but your board of directors, when you're doing that quarterly board meeting or bi-monthly board meeting, they're putting a lot of pressure on what they think you should be doing, right? And if they think marketing's just wasting money, they'll put a lot of pressure on the CEO to kind of cut that back, or the CFO. But if they're like, "Oh, wow, like, man, you did this campaign in the city and whoa, it lifted our awareness by 10 points. And wow, we're seeing that flow through to our leads like that. Well, hey, we should do more of this, right?" Um, so I don't know. I just think there's a lot that goes into it. And, from a culture, metrics, how you share these team goals, like everything kind of funnels into it.
So double clicking a little bit on what you said there about metrics being potentially creativity killers, I think is how you framed it. I was just talking to a friend on my way in this morning. He called me and we were actually talking about brand measurement and how even if you have the wrong metrics, there's still value in having some metrics to take to board meetings to get people to understand that you're trying your best and you're trying to track things. It's a better way of posturing than basically just trying to get people to believe you when you say, "Hey, we're on the right track." So, is your perspective here that the devil's in the details, and it really comes down to not whether to measure or not, but getting the measurement right and getting the metrics right?
Yeah, and I should clarify. For me, it's the wrong metrics kill creative. The wrong metrics kill brand, right? If all you have is very short-term funnel metrics, like it's very hard to invest in long-term things. And creating a brand is by definition one of those, right? So yeah, I think I don't know if it's super like in the devil in the details. It's just like, hey, track some brand metrics. I don't care. There's a whole bunch of them, right? Like anyone that's on B2C knows these, and B2B, it's like they're a little bit new, but I don't care if it's some high level awareness metric, if it's some type of sentiment metric, whatever it is. Like, and by the way, it's a lot easier to track these things too. Like, we're no longer a lot of B2B companies, I think, were like, oh my God, it's going to cost us $500,000 to run a brand recall survey. And they're thinking of one like you would literally have people at airports asking questions, and it there's tons of tools that can help get you that for so much less money now. So I just think it's important. Yes, I absolutely think it's important to track the metrics, but I think just track a couple brand metrics and have that as a goal for your entire marketing team, right? Like, and when you have that, and then you can show the improvements to the board, like I think they're much more likely to buy in. A lot of boards, a lot of CEOs, a lot of founders have been burnt by bad marketing teams in the past, where they gave them a lot of money, they weren't tracking metrics, they didn't really see it, like the numbers didn't go up into the right, and they're like, "Oh, we wasted it," right? And that really hurts. That hurts future marketing teams as well.
I don't think there's been a greater killer of buy-in for marketing than when a marketing leader says, "Oh, we can't we can't measure brand. We You gotta just trust me, right?"
Yeah, it's tough, and I get it too. Like, marketing's so hard to begin with. Everyone in the company is a marketing expert, right? Um, Marketers, you have to ideally, you have this blend of, like, super creative, but you're also a quant. You're great with sales, but you're also great with product. You know how to sell to enterprises, but you also know how to sell to SMBs. You know B2C, you know B2B. There's so many lenses, right? And it's really hard for, I think, sometimes the creative brand folks to kind of understand the metrics enough to where they can advocate for it. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's all about trust. It's building trust with the C-suite, it's building trust with the board, so that you can make these type of investments that by definition brand it's a little bit more long term, right? Like, Coca-Cola did not run ads for 1 year and go like, "We're good. our brand is created. We're done here, folks." When you invest in brand, it's a long-term initiative. Not say it's all ads, but I think kind of get where I'm going there.
Yeah, that's great.
And what advice would you give to someone who's new in a marketing leadership role, perhaps for the first time, responsible for hiring and helping lead a team?
Yeah, the thing I wish somebody would have told me earlier is it's 90% communication and education of these stakeholders, right? Like, in a weird way, I don't know. I've been doing marketing a long time. I don't think the strategy is that hard. I think if you get enough marketers in a room, like, you can kind of agree on, like, hey, this is a good strategy or this is what we should be doing. I found what is far, 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 far harder is educating all of these stakeholders that are perceived marketing experts, right? Like the CEO, the founder, the CFO, the head of sales, the head of product, the head of legal, the human resource person, and then the six board members who all have different backgrounds and different thoughts on what marketing is and what they should be doing. And the best way, like I've heard described to me, which I tell other people too, is you have to view it as it's its own marketing campaign. Here are 20 different stakeholders internally at your company, maybe six board members and maybe 14 internal stakeholders. Maybe it's a little less than that, but it depends on your company. And okay, you have to identify those ICPs, those personas. What do they know about marketing? What are their perceptions of it? How do they understand attribution? How do they understand offline marketing campaigns? How do they understand content? What do they think each one of these things take? Right? Like, a lot of founders will be like, all right, we asked you to, do a new TV offline campaign. Why does it take more than a week? Right? Like, well, let me educate you. Right? Nurture. So you have to identify that. And then you think about, all right, well, what's all the content I'm going to distribute to my stakeholders over time? How do I educate, nurture them? How do I check in, see what their current perception is? Build consensus and support for, hey, why are we taking this approach? Why are we investing in brand? Why are we doing these other things? Show the metrics, evolve. Like, it's such an important, critical stakeholder, because if you don't get the support of these stakeholders, it's so hard, right? It's hard to do marketing projects where you don't use maybe product resources, or where you're using you need the buy-in from the sales team, or you're using funds from finance. Like, you just have to get these buy-ins. You need to hire new people, you need HR behind it, right? You need the board to actually approve of the plan that you're doing. So I mean, really, for me, like, I say, like, hey, as a leader, you should be spending 50, 60, 70% of your time on educating these stakeholders. Now, that's, hey, you have a team, right? team, hey, go out, let's go execute. Here's the specific strategy we're trying to do. But you as a leader, like you have to do that. If you don't do that, your team is going to get, crucified. They're just going to get like attacked. And you have to be able to defend them and educate all these stakeholders. So that would be my point of view. And I know it's a little non-conventional, but just from being around the corner a few times, that's what I see.
Yeah, that's one of the best responses I've ever heard. So thanks for that. Um, so shifting gears a little bit to talk about the future. Everybody's talking about AI in product, AI in creative workflows. With the proliferation of AI and its use uh, in marketing functions and by marketers, like how do you see the role of marketers and maybe specifically marketing leaders evolving in the next couple of years here?
I do think the role of marketing leaders is you're going to be using a lot more AI tools, a lot more autonomous agents. And you're really going to be the one that's going to be the generalist that looks at all these different tools and how are they bringing together your marketing strategy and executing on it. I mean, I think the reality is like these marketing teams aren't going to need to be as big, right? You're going to have less people there. You're going to have people that really know these different autonomous agents, how they can build them, how they can be specific, either internally or leveraging best of use cases out there. But you have to almost be like the coordinator, someone that sees how all these tools work together. Are they applying a certain level of quality? Are they applying to your strategy? But I spent a lot of time marketing like every single field. And I also spent a lot of time with the AI startups. Every single discipline within marketing is having an AI tool that's coming um, to both help and also potentially replace the people who are doing it. I don't care if you're doing ad buy, if you're doing content creation, if you're doing messaging, if you're doing persona, if you're doing attribution, if you're doing ops, like every single function is having tools that can come in and potentially do that role, right? So I think in a weird way, the marketing leaders, like the higher you're up, I think you're actually a little better off because they need someone that can see how all these tools work together. But it's going to change a lot, right? And I don't think people kind of maybe have come to grips with that, like how much that is changing and how their roles are going to be evolving. And I hope like the optimist in me wants to think that like, oh, this will unleash all this new creative freedom. And historically, we look at, history and any new technological invention, it was always like, oh my God, it's going to take all the jobs and the world's going to end. And it always ends up like creating new jobs and people. And I really hope that, but um, I don't know. It's going to be a very different landscape.
What about in terms of some of the other emerging trends that we're seeing play out in the world of B2B marketing? What are you excited about? And conversely, what are you seeing right now kind of play out that you're thinking, man, I wish this would just go away?
I have a daughter. She's in high school, and I think in a lot of ways, like she's super creative, and I think in some ways, like she would be great to run her own business, right? And I think what's happening is all these tools that historically cost tons of money, and you needed all this expertise on. I can see a world in like B2B where you have all these autonomous AI agents. You have a legal agent, right? You have a marketing, AI agent. You have a finance and entrepreneurs and people like my daughter, like I feel like they're gonna be able to go out and create some amazing things, right? There's no longer all these barriers to where, you need to hire this super expensive lawyer to do your first contract, right? Like where they're gonna have these different AI agents that can come in and help you with that. So I feel like that's a cool unleashing creativity. I think another trend I like in B2B is actually in the pricing side. I know we're talking more about brand, but a cool thing is evolving in pricing where you're moving more away from per user pricing or usage based pricing to outcome based pricing, right? And outcome based pricing is this idea of like, hey, you only pay if the final thing happens. So, like, if you're in customer support, historically, you'd pay by the number of customer support agents you had, or maybe the number of times you use the software. Well, now it's like you only pay if an autonomous agent actually solved the issue, right? Maybe it's like $1 per issue, right? Something like that. So I think like that is a kind of a cool trend and introducing a lot of risks for different businesses out there. Um, Stuff I would like to see go away. I feel like AI is also creating just a ton of spam, right? Like it was so funny. I was on LinkedIn yesterday and I think I'd made a post And the comments on the post were really weird, right? They were kind of like just summing up like what I wrote with not really like a unique take or anything or no personality. And I'm like, okay, I know these are AI, but the one of them, it was amazing. They had a freemium plan where it was a generic response and it was like powered by this AI company, right? And they were using that so more people would see it. But I'm like, oh my God, you're actually advertising that you're posting stuff that you did not write that some AI bot wrote for you, right? So I think like unfortunately AI, the capabilities of it allow for just tons more content and tons more spam. And I'm just seeing it personally. Like I think a lot of times with all this stuff in B2B, like don't think of it as like, hey, as a VP or CMO, just think of it as like as an average user, right? Would you like this or not like this? And I'm getting inundated with a ton of like cold AI, SDR, email, and spam. And I think in a lot of ways, like I feel like that's a dark side. And I guess no matter what new technology comes out, when email, it's like tons of spam came there, and phone, tons of spam came there. But like I just feel like I'm personally feeling it a lot more spam now.
Spammers are gonna spam.
It's why important to build a brand, right? Yeah, there we go. Tie it all back together.
Looking back, what are you most proud of in your career so far?
I am most proud, like I said, I have a daughter. I want her to, be proud of what I've built, what I've done. And I'm most proud, I mean, this is a little bit different, but I'm most proud I never backstabbed anyone. When you look at politics and the Machiavellianness, I protected people that I thought should be protected, because a lot of times your team will be attacked, rightfully or wrongfully. I never I never did just a lot of stuff I see sometimes where people will do whatever they can to get ahead and throw someone under the bus or not admit they were wrong or protect their team. And I'm just proud I tried to do that the right way. And I think if you talk to people on my team, I would hope they would say that. That's what I always tried to do. And I always tried to give them the credit. I never tried to take credit. I just think there's a right way to lead. And I'm really proud I did it that way.
That's really cool. You're thinking about the example you're setting for your daughter and future generation. Wrapping up here, where can people follow along with your work and check out your new business and see what you're up to?
I've been doing a lot of advising stuff, and I love that. If there's any SaaS or AI startups and they want a little help on their go to market or marketing, feel free to reach out to me. SaaSCMOPro.com is the URL, or you can do CMOPro.com. I have that one too. Um, and what I started doing was I started getting like I've been advising founders and marketing leaders for 5 or 6 years. I started noticing I was getting a lot of the same questions. And so I was like, I'm going to just start recording my answers to these. So I created a YouTube channel, SaaS CMO Pro. And with all the most common questions I get, right? Like in this case, this new video is coming out, like, how did Slack grow so fast? Or how do you create a brand? Or how do you, do multi-touch attribution or all these type of things, right? That we kind of geek out on in marketing. And so there's a ton of content there. If you go to SaaS CMO Pro, you can follow it on YouTube. If you like shorts, like there's also stuff on like TikTok or Instagram or wherever you like. Or I've got a Substack that has like the longer articles. But I really just put that stuff out to like, just help other people out. It's all free. I don't charge anything for it. And just hopefully, they can save some of the scar tissue that I had to go through and learning these things and, make their lives a little bit easier.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Bill. Really appreciate you joining us.
No worries. Hey, thank you so much for having me. Loved all the questions. I appreciate you having me on.